On February 18th, Donald Trump made remarks about a very peaceful country. We all know by now which country it was: Sweden.
Trump had some sobering news about a recent attack on one of our allies.
You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden.
No one would believe that.
And he was ridiculed for his remarks, and some of those remarks are actually very amusing. Sweden, terrorist attack. What has he been smoking? Came from an ex-Swedish prime minister, no less, although Donald Trump didn't mention anything about terrorist attack. So what actually happened last night?
Because it turns out on Friday night, no incident occurred in Sweden, which is actually headline news there. Nothing happens again. And no one...
Except from this: an armed robbery in a Muslim ghetto. Is that something you should be concerned if an armed robbery happens in your neighborhood? Well, you should be concerned if Donald Trump was smoking, right? According to Swedish Migration Agency, the country processed 81,000 asylum applications in 2014, 163,000 in 2015, and 29,000 last year, with another 25,000 to 45,000 expected this year. And the country received thousands of asylum applications, mostly from children. And since these innocent children have started to come to Sweden, the country is now seeing an avalanche of sex crimes. You know, the typical stuff innocent children usually do in their countries they're coming from. Should you be concerned if your city becomes the rape capital of Europe? Should you be concerned if neighboring Denmark only have 7.3 rapes per 100,000 inhabitants committed by Muslims from Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and Somalia, compared to 53.2 rapes in Sweden? Well, you should be very concerned for being called a racist. So what else should you be concerned for? Should you be concerned if women are gang raped by Muslim migrants and the victim have abortion later on, as was the case after the notorious New Year's Eve mass assaults in Cologne? Well, if you live in Sweden, you should rather be very concerned for the police, because they will do their best to hide all such incidents from you for years. Swedish police and media will go so far into their progressive rectum to cover up this cultural enrichment that they will even hide the ethnicity of those criminals in case it portrays those innocent child refugee in a bad light. After all, you are the racist, you are the bigot, neo-Nazi Islamophobe, you are the one who should be ashamed because you are not progressive. In Sweden last year, there has been repeated cases of child molestation and even gang rape in open-air music festivals. It is called taharush, a sickening and disgusting form of sexual assault against women, where assailants surround the victim, while the outer rings of men shield the perpetrators, as the victim would then be groped, stripped, beaten and bitten, penetrated with fingers, and even raped by those savages, one by one inside the circle. Should you be concerned if the same thing happens to your daughter? Well, of course not, because we celebrate diversity. Remember Arab Spring? Lara Logan went into that Middle Eastern cesspit to cover for it, and she was gang raped for hours by as many as 200 Muslims in a similar fashion. And obviously, it goes without saying that Western culture is the inferior one. Since the arrival of these Muslim migrants, sex crime has increased in music festivals and swimming baths. And as a result, separate swimming pools for men and women is introduced, which is unheard of before the arrival of these so-called child refugees. Even nowadays, the school buses are also needed to be separated for men and women too. Because of the increase of sexual assaults in swimming baths, there are groping guard, vigilantes, who patrol swimming pools in Sweden against migrants molesting female bathers. But then again, it is Sweden. The feminists will shout like savages in the street and in the media to tell you how racist it is to do such a thing. They will even go to one of those Middle Eastern sinkholes where women are stoned to death on a regular basis wearing a hijab to uphold women's rights there. Isn't that progressive? At the Breville Festival, there has been reports of 40 sexual assaults, including 5 accounts of rape. Just a week before, at a different music festival, there has been 35 similar instances. And in some cases, the girls that were raped were as young as 12 years old. Have you ever heard of a country where women are not allowed to go out in public without a male member of the family? Saudi Arabia, right? Well, no, actually it is Östersund in Sweden. In this small city, there has been 8 sexual assaults over the period of 3 weeks, and according to the police, nothing of these kinds was ever heard of before, and now they are warning women not to go out alone. Welcome to Saudi Östersund. Imagine that you are a Jew and you have a daughter who lives in Sweden at a Muslim neighborhood. What do you think would happen to your daughter? Well, previously we have seen a cultural affair where the whole family, father, son, cousin, all joined together to gang rape underage British children in the town of Rotherham. But hey, that was in Britain. Now you are in Sweden. After all, Sweden prides itself to be a feminist government of the millennium. So you have absolutely nothing to worry for your daughter, right? A 13-year-old Jewish girl had to flee from Sweden as she was brutally raped and savagely beaten by a Somali rapist who shouted, "Black dick is expensive," as she was raping her. On one occasion, she was knocked to the ground by a brother of the rapist, while another hit her on the mouth and smashed her teeth as the mother of the rapist kicked the girl with her foot. Again, a Muslim family abusing an underage girl in Sweden. Welcome to Swedistan. And the brave Swedish authorities decided to sentence this rapist for this crime with 180 hours of community service. Swedish multiculturalism nightmare, dream, was celebrated in its fullest as 5 Afghan teenagers gang raped a boy after beating him severely in the head. They dragged him into the wood at knife point, where he was beaten and spat on during this horrifying sex assault. But the progressive judges decided not to deport those savages because their home country is too dangerous. In other words, Swedish police and authorities are happy to let these scumbags work freely on the street so that they can beat and rape as many women and kids as they wish. And that's exactly what happened when police allowed this savage to walk freely after he had previously stabbed a woman and tried to slit her throat. And because of this stupidity, he had murdered another woman later on. And even if they are convicted, which is highly unlikely, well, at least in most cases, what shall be the punishment for raping a 13-year-old girl and having anal and vaginal sex during the rape? 2 months? Can you believe 2 goddamn months in prison? After all, he is a kid, so why don't you just let him go straight away? Yes, that's exactly what police did when a 23-year-old girl was beaten and choked by Moroccans as they were laughing at her during the rape. All he has to do is to tell police that he was a child, although he may look like a 60-year-old psychopath. The police will believe him and they will let him go without any penalty because the Swedish police are the racist. The Swedish people are the racist after all. Police will even cover up for these subhuman animals as these Arab bastards from Syria stabbed a student to death who confronted these savages as they tried to sexually assault a fellow classmate. Although Swedish police and judges are a laughing joke when it comes to protecting their children, they are very brave when it comes to handling these criminals face to face, as these brave officers did by running away from the scene like a coward, like a fugitive, as they encountered this gang of innocent refugees. A Swedish woman was kidnapped at gunpoint by 7 Muslim refugees and forced to perform oral, vaginal, and anal sex, while 2 of those savages gang raped her simultaneously. But the police decided to let 5 of them go free of charge because there is not sufficient supporting evidence that the correct application requires for a conviction. Here is the pop quiz for you. Who do you think is safer in the streets of Sweden, a handicapped woman or a gang of Muslim migrants? Well, let me clarify it for you. A wheelchair-bound woman was gang-raped for hours by 5 Muslim refugees, forcing their handicapped victim to suffer through the most mentally and physically damaging experience she could ever had. But the police and the judges, after arresting the criminals, showed their moral conviction by releasing them, because they are not convinced that the handicapped victim fought back hard enough or tried to run. As the news spread through the community and the outraged locals torched the area later on, about 300 leftists and feminists joined together to launch a counter-demonstration under the slogan against racism and sexism. Police even sent backups so that the progressive leftists and feminists could take back the city from the Nazis. So if your children is raped and you get angry, police, judges, and their progressive leftists and feminists will all come to help you saving the rapist. And who said Sweden is not the feminist country of the world? After an asylum worker was murdered at an asylum house by an asylum seeker, then should you feel sorry for the victim? Actually, you should feel very sorry for the police chief. Who knows what horrors he have been through? Yes, that's how the feminist police chief of Sweden actually sympathized with the killer after 22-year-old victim was horribly stabbed and killed by a refugee. And who said Sweden does not champion on human rights? In the small city of Vimmerby, a migrant sexually abused 4 different women in one night. And in one case, he was shouting about how much he hates Sweden and that he was only there to fuck Swedish women. Although in the neighboring Denmark, almost half of the rapes are conducted by Muslims, you won't get into any trouble here in Sweden if you do the same. Swedish media is very progressive, hiding the identity of those third world savages just in case it makes them the racist. There are literally hundreds of such cases. In Malmö, for example, 2 little kids were raped even in broad daylight. One of those rabbis who are flooding into Sweden after given a free pass into the society with all those free money that these animals don't deserve at all, pulled down pants of a 9-year-old native girl and humped on her in front of everyone while calling her whore. But the progressive dummies of the school blamed the victim because she was blonde and cute. A 45-year-old repeatedly raped a girl aged 10, both anally and vaginally, in a refugee living in Boston, while forcing her to watch porn movies. Not only she suffered severe bleeding as a consequence for her anal and vaginal sex, the perpetrator also caused damage to her abdomen during the rape. And for this savagery and barbarism, he got only 6 years in prison. If you are a Muslim refugee, then you can even rape a girl to death, but nobody will protest against you to prove that they are the real feminists, to prove that they are not Islamophobic. As women are being raped and sexually assaulted in the streets, in buses, in swimming baths, in schools, and in apartments, Sweden's feminist government thinks that instead of kicking these criminal chancers, rapists, opportunists, thugs, and scums out of the country, they should solve this epidemic of rape with bracelets. And who said Sweden's police commissioner is an imbecile? And I can go on and on and on. Sex crimes have doubled since 2012. Muslim migrants are 5.5 times more likely to commit sexual violence against women than the native Swedes. Gun violence has increased severely by 84% in Sweden. Malmö is the most dangerous city in entire Nordic region and all across Western Europe. And almost half of the Swedish women are now afraid to go out alone in the evening. If you are a Muslim rapist living in Malmö, the rape capital of Europe, thanks to you, the city will offer you free apartment. Well, we all know that you are damned ignorant human scum unworthy of employment, but don't worry, you will be given that free apartment as soon as you arrive, so that you can continue to enrich the community by raping more and more Swedish women in the street as well as inside your apartment. as recently happened when three savages like you raped a woman at gunpoint for hours and put it on Facebook Live. But in contrast, if you are a Swedish citizen, then to save the trouble for all those poor Swedish women, all you have to do is to sit and relax for only 3 years before you could rent an apartment in Malmo with your own money. Oh, by the way, in case of Stockholm, you have to wait for 20 years before you could rent your own apartment. 20 years. Once again, 20 years to be able to rent a place in Stockholm. And because of this acute housing problem, some students are forced to sleep on the basement. In fact, due to this invasion, according to National Housing Board, a new Stockholm is to be built within next 6 years, where far more homes have to be built. There are nearly 355,000 senior Swedish citizens living below the European Union's poverty line. But good news for you, if you are a Muslim migrant who came here in Sweden illegally, you will have state-funded health care, dental care, contraception counseling, and maternity care, as well as abortion care. You will also be given free ambulance to and from the healthcare facilities, and also an interpreter. And to make sure that Swedish authorities value equality, you, as a legal criminal migrant, will pay less fees for your medical and dental care than the native Swedes. Humanitarian superpower and the feminist government of the millennium, Sweden took 163,000 invaders, asylum seekers, in 2015 alone. And out of those 163,000 culturally enriched human savages and scums, well, as most of you really are, raping and sexually molesting young girls in schools, buses, swimming baths, streets, in public gatherings, and in taxpayer-funded free apartments, only fewer than 500 actually managed to secure a job. And in Malmo, the multicultural hellhole, some of those welfare parasites couldn't even get a job after 10 years. But Sweden is making 900 billion in profit from migration. 900 billion. Which is obviously later revealed to be a forgery. But hey, this is Sweden. And diversity is our strength. And who said that child marriage can only happen in Saudi Arabia or Yemen or in Africa? While the feminist government in history of Sweden legalizes it for you here in Sweden. After all, it's all about equality. So this brings me to the cost. What is the cost of maintaining one family of Muslim migrants here in Sweden? Every migrant is entitled to receive $700 per month. So if you have a wife, you and your wife will get a total of $1,400. You can also get up to $500 for supporting up to 3 children. And an additional $192 as subsidy for rent. So for you and your family, you will get a total of $2,100 for 1 month. And you are entitled to get it for free. In other words, you don't have to do anything to be paid $2,100 per month if you live in Sweden with your family. Swedish authorities even paid ISIS jihadists $600 per month for their children even when they were outside of Sweden. Okay, now just think about only one person. $700 for living and another $200 as rent subsidy. That is $900 for just one person. So, for 163,000 migrants that arrived in 2015 alone, Swedish government have to pay nearly a minimum of $2 billion per year to support those migrants. So that's nearly $2 billion on the taxpayers. And it doesn't include cost of family reunification, such as bringing more wives or children from overseas, or the cost of raising kids, which is again going to be burdened on the shoulder of the taxpayers. So a minimum expenditure of $2 billion, in other words, 18 billion Swedish kroner. But the actual figures are far more severe. As I just mentioned, this is just minimum that is being completely wasted. No surprise why nearly 500,000 senior Swedish citizens are living under poverty. And on top of all of that, there are almost twice as many births from Somalian and Syrian refugees than the native Swedes. And also an additional cost for celebrating diversity, like spending millions on female genital mutilation, which necessarily wasn't part of the Swedish community before Islam came to the shores. And with all this free money and healthcare facilities, how these economic migrants and welfare parasites, I'm sorry, I have to use those words, are culturally enriching the native Swedish community other than raping their girls in music festivals or in the street? Yes, you guessed it right, by setting fire on the homes and accommodations. If an wanted criminal is arrested, violent protests will erupt, cars will be set on fire, shops will be looted, and stones will be thrown at the police. Yes, that's how things run in Rinkeby, Sweden. And in parallel to the epidemic of rape, with an astronomical increase of assaults by 1400%, now the country is suffering from an epidemic of arson. There have been 110 arsons in many accommodation centers across Sweden in 2016, and Swedish officials confirmed that 92 of those infernos were started deliberately, with 37 of them being started by a resident at the home. And because of this epidemic of violence, 3 police officials are resigning per day, with some of them are criminalized for telling people the truth. And now, there are 55 no-go areas in Sweden. Interestingly though, ISIS recently released an article titled Just Terra, offering operational instructions for carrying out lone wolf arson attacks on behalf of the organization. And ISIS indeed claim responsibilities for arson attacks too in Malmö. Not only that, ISIS even openly recruiting jihadists in Sweden. Not in Iraq or Syria, ISIS openly recruiting jihadists in Sweden. And that's why Swedish city of Gothenburg is the largest recruitment city of jihadists for ISIS in Europe. Not only it is now constitutional to fly ISIS flags in Sweden, authorities are desperate to bring back some 140 ISIS jihadists into the country as part of reintegration program, providing them free housing, driving license, and even paying off their debts. Remember those nearly 400,000 senior Swedish citizens living under the poverty line? You still remember? Oh, come on. You can't be serious, can you? Oh, by the way, ISIS is accused of conducting genocide against Yazidis and Christians and other minorities, as dozens of mass graves have been uncovered last year in Mount Sinjar. In some cases, the victims were old women who were killed in masses because they couldn't be sold as sex slaves. Children are thrown into those graves as they were beheaded with an axe or even burnt alive. In one particular case, one woman was forced to watch as ISIL fighters raped her 9-year-old daughter and let the girl bleed to death. On the other hand, Mehmet Kaplan, who founded the organization Swedish Muslims for Peace and Justice, compared these jihadists with the veterans of World War II who defended neighboring Finland from the Soviet military aggression. And not only people like Mehmet Kaplan are given a safe haven in Sweden, Swedish authorities now want to rehabilitate these child-burning jihadists into the society. What could possibly go wrong?
Abbo! Jag filmar allting! Fattar du? Double jam! Hajar du? Säg någonting, jag har kommentar brorsan! Kommentar brorsan! Var det godkänt?
Muslim Brotherhood, which is designated as a terrorist organization in many countries across Middle East, is operating in Sweden in many names and forms. Swedish Social Democratic Party even signed an agreement with Muslim communities promising that they will have more representatives in the government. And last but not the least, there is an arms deal between Saudi Arabia and Sweden, which facilitates building a weapon factory within Saudi Arabia. No wonder why Swedish government is so silent while Saudi-funded ISIS is so popular in the city of Gothenburg and all across Sweden. Gross sexual violation against native European women are skyrocketing after mass Muslim migration. And you still might be wondering why. Well, the answer is very simple. The perfect man for Muslims, Muhammad, is not only a warlord and a pedophile, as most of you might know by now, who beheaded 800 Jewish people in one day and raped a 9-year-old at the age of 54. He was also a thug who used to loot caravans, and a slaver and a slave trader who owned and raped many sex slaves himself. And also an aider and abettor of gang rape who ordered his army of murderers and thugs to gang rape women even in front of their husbands. And as a result of these inhuman, savagely and barbaric teachings, Muslims view Christian girls are only meant for one thing, the pleasure of Muslim men. And nowadays, half of the Swedish women no longer feel safe, not anywhere else like those third world sinkholes such as Afghanistan or Pakistan where women are routinely murdered in public, but in the streets of Sweden. So, if you have come to this far, I do appreciate your patience and time, and please share this message. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and also consider subscribing. And finally, my only request would be, please don't let this to happen to your family. Not now, not in 1,000 years to come. Thank you.